Hi Maria.
Hi, Giampaolo.
We're here in your exhibition Lake
Yes.
at Schwabinggrad in Munich, where you've been for the past week, hosted by the Salta Art Foundation. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your interest in the myth of Leda and the Swan, which has informed the exhibition and also your performance.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the swan figure has been always like a fascination for me, because mainly of the Swan Lake actually, and maybe it was like the first interest I had in a myth around this hybridism between human and animal. And there's also a text by Gregory Bateson, British anthropologist, which calls Why a Swan? And he calls it a metalogue, like between his father and, not his father, but a father and a daughter. And the daughter is asking is she a swan or is she a woman? And the father is saying, it's sort of swan and it's a sort of woman. So this sort of is about this transition and metamorphosis between swan and human. And then, parallel to this actually, I started to look at the Leda and the Swan myth. There are so many depictions in the art history about it, and the fact that is a copulation. They is a seduction, and they have children together. She lays 2 eggs, and after this encounter. And so this theme about this copulation and hybridism and how woman and animal, but with a divine aspect, because it's Zeus depicted and disguised as a swan. All these elements together, they are very intriguing. And also there's a Yeats poem, sonnet, that he explores a lot the passage that this myth represents from myth to history, because one of her children, in one of the eggs, is Helen of Troy. And so some people would say that this is the beginning of Greek history and so. But for me this is also very connected with a multi-species landscape, that we are not only human and we connect our lives. We have bacteria and many animals and beings in our bodies that are other natures. We are many natures, and we can formally connect to plants and animals and other beings. So it's about as well how our self is not exactly what we feel or exactly human in the end, or only human, but yeah, we have this many natures in our nature.
And what you say is also in some ways true of your work, which in many cases, including in this exhibition, is a kind of hybrid of sculpture and in certain cases drawings, but also dance. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you thought about translating the myth of Leda and the Swan into movement.
Yeah, well, The relation with sculpture in my work, in my research, is because I had also this art history background beyond from dance, and I was always looking at the classical sculptures, and I mean any sculpture, and I only see dance everywhere, and then when I first started like my creation process, I was not much into doing work with collectives or in the dance scene, like with choreographers and other dancers. I was very much alone with materials. So I was dancing with materials and seeing how this behavior occurred between the movement of the body and the movement of the materials, the behavior of the materials. And I started to grab materials from the street or I don't know, many places, and like finding figures and like lines and language. And yeah, I think you're right that this metamorphosis of natures, it's also about this transition between genders in the work, actually. Yeah, it makes sense a lot.
And like in many of your exhibitions that combine sculpture and performance, this work in part consists of certain markings that you make on the floor and on the wall, which are related to the sculptures. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about those and how they function as part of the performance. I get the sense that they're a little bit of a score in some ways.
Yes, they often are. And the process begins very encrypted to another person to read it, because I kind of mark a rhythm when I trying to create the work. And so I mark some points of the work that are important to me, and some developings of rhythm like that, like you have like an ascension and a descending process, and this kind of measure of like a poem as well, like this body language and how I can move in the space. So it's kind of a map for me. But when I start to eventually work with someone else, I work to transform this into a more readable score, but it all begins from the same place. I mean, it's from rhythm and like punctuations in the choreography and in the language I'm working on, because the thing about dance is that not only dance as we mainly have dance in our minds, like spinning and going through space, but dance as a form of language that is not linear. So you relate to it without a linear sense of time. So it's not so much about past, present, and future in a linear mode, but more of a spatial dynamic that everything is simultaneous. And even the lake is a metaphor for that, that the lake is not like the river. I mean, in the lake you can walk in every direction and it's always fresh, it's always going forward, but it's not like a river that the water passes. So this course, yeah, they are very much about rhythm and this kind of mindset that is not linear, is more combinatorial actually. So you can just rearrange things and keep the message. So,
Yeah, it's a very beautiful idea of dance being a kind of language in space.
Yeah. True.
We've spoken about how your movements have been, I think, increasingly informed by your study of Indian choreography and movement traditions. In this performance, I think it comes out in the very precise movements that you do with your hands and fingers throughout. Can you talk a little bit about the influence that your study of Eastern movement has had on your practice?
Yes. Actually, Eastern movement in general was always an influence. I have studied topeng, which is a Balinese kind of dance, but presented more in temples. And then I studied Buto, which is a post-war Japanese dance. But Indian classical dance is something that I'm studying very recently, like for a year now. And but it was something that connected with some devotion I have to Indian spirituality. And Indian classical dance works a lot telling myths and poetry through all the geometry of the body, in the first place, the rhythm, the music structures a lot the stories, but you have the hand movements, the mudras and hastas, and they have so many meanings. I mean, you can it's like a dictionary of symbols and signs, and you can combine them to tell something. It's really a sign language, and I've been studying that, and it's really beautiful how is hand yoga, like you can really find a brain in your hand and just express very sophisticated things through these gestures. And yes, I hope I can develop more of these studies. Actually, I'm very into it lately.
I do think it is fascinating how your performances, if you have the knowledge and are able to read the specific movements, it is an entirely different layer of meaning that's being conveyed aside from the sculpture or the installation or the score. There's so many layers of different languages and meanings in your work that a person is invited to read.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something, what I like about the hands is that something that it's related to your heart as well. So it's less, I mean, the mouth is very connected to the brain, to the mind. And I think when you express with your body and with your hands, you're kind of connected to your heart. So it's a more loving way to exchange language and exchange energy with other people.
And Maria, we've talked about how your work is also informed by your interest in German culture, Romanticism, the work of Goethe. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and what it means to be having this exhibition in Munich.
Yes, actually it's a great coincidence for me that my first solo show outside my home country is in Germany, because I have this interest in Goethe's science, like very strong since my university years, and I was very much into exploring the metamorphosis of the plants, the theory of colors, all his studies on mineralogy, geology, clouds, and I mean so many things. And he really coined the term morphology, and which is about this metamorphosis of forms, and how he would say nature doesn't jump steps, so everything has transitions, and but not only Goethe, I think Novalis and the fragments were very important as well, and all their look towards nature. I mean, Novalis used to work with mining and things, so he had like this relation to the earth and to the soil, and this really comes to his fragments, his philosophical fragments, and they are able to, and I mean his main book is Polen, Blutenstaub, I think, in German, and it's like you read it and it functions really as a seed, because it enters your brain and sprouts and something grows from it. So it is the language having really an action, and so language is like nature. I love as well like the idea that language comes from the behavior of collective animals like bees. I mean, Joseph Beuys was also looking very much to it, and Rudolf Steiner, and this all comes from Goethe actually. So yeah, this has been important to me. I don't know why, but it always touched me. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Maria, for coming to Munich and sharing your work with us, and for taking some time to talk about all the different hybridities that your work involves.
Thank you, Giampaolo. I appreciate it a lot.